Welcome to week number 5, our 5th week in our journey. I thought it might be appropriate as we begin this evening, because this is fairly more, shall I say, abstract than maybe we're used to. I thought it might be important to tell you a little bit about myself and where what we're doing fits into that. I went to college as a ministerial student, and after 4 years in a denominational school, on the day I graduated, someone asked me what I was going to do next, and I said, I'm going to go to seminary. And they said, why in the world would you want to go to seminary? And I replied, to see if there's anything left to believe in. And so I came out of seminary and began my life, more studying. And here I was 10 years down the road, having at that moment, through a series of events, found myself unemployed and with enough money to make it through the month, about 4 weeks. This was January of 1980. And I had been out using the denominational process, putting my resume out, name out, to seek some sort of denominational employment in some church. And the guy I had spoken to was very honest. He went over to his cabinet file that was like 25 feet long, the drawer, and it was so stuffed he could not put mine in it. He just said, I don't want to get your hopes up. Obviously, they weren't. And I had knocked on a few doors of secular employment, and nothing had opened that was in any way kind of suitable. And I remember sitting on my front porch, totally at the end of my rope, and I prayed one of those dangerous prayers. God, I've had it. I didn't call me to the ministry. You called me to the ministry. It's not up to me to bail you out and keep trying to find some haphazard job until you come through. So I'm done. If you haven't done something before the money runs out, I'm gone. And I will never again be in any kind of full-time public paid ministry, period. I'm going to get on with my life. So I got me a 2x4 and my Boy Scout pocket knife and started whittling. True story. 2 days later, the phone rang, and the guy that had the 20-foot long drawer said, there may be a prospect. You're supposed to go to such and such little church this Sunday night. You're going to give the sermon, the homily. There will be in the congregation that night, in the denominational language, a pulpit committee to see whether or not you halfway appeal to them, and if you do, hang around afterwards to see if anybody approaches you. So I did all of that, and they did approach me and invited me out to their rural country church, further out in the country, to come and speak before their church the next Sunday morning and the next Sunday night. And that next Sunday night, they then would take a vote to see whether or not they wanted me to come and be their pastor. So On that Sunday morning, I put my last $5 in the gas tank. I drove out the 20 miles to that little country church and preached. Had lunch with somebody in the church, preached again that night. I was to go wait somewhere while they discussed it and voted. They took their vote and they asked me to be their new pastor. And before I could leave that night, the treasurer came over to me and handed me a check. And I said, "What's this for?" And they said, "Well, we pay you weekly and we pay you in advance." So I spent my last $5 that morning without a job, and I went home that night with a job and a paycheck. True story. 1 hour after getting home, I received a phone call from someone who was a member of this church that I was now the pastor of, telling me I needed to get to the local hospital. Someone was dying in ICU. So I go. There is a man there whose leg had been amputated because of diabetes, and I went into the ICU room and met him, and I met his wife and adult children, and I stepped out into the hall, and his wife came up to me in need of answers my liberal theology did not have. I could put my arm around her and comfort her, but I absolutely had nothing to say. And I prayed another one of those dangerous prayers on my way leaving the hospital. Please let this man live long enough that I can find an answer for his wife. He lived 6 months. And I had started down a road. I remember parking in front of a then Christian bookstore. I was a Protestant world. And I said, "God, if there's any book in there I ought to go read that's going to help, take me to it." And I walked in and went over to a book I may have walked by 1,000 times, and this time I picked it up and bought it. It was by an author that I had laughed at his books when I was in seminary. I had even gone to Europe, and someone had said, "Oh, are you going to go to this man's place in Switzerland?" And I had said, "No, he has nothing to offer me." God has a way of slapping us in the face with our arrogance. Here it was, I was now buying that man's book. And so my rehabilitation began 10 years after I had left to see if there was anything left to believe in. 10 years later, that journey continued, and I was attending inquirers classes down at St. Elijah Church in Oklahoma City. And in January 1991, which would have been 11 years after that week I prayed, "I'm done," for the first time in 11 years, I resigned being a Protestant pastor. The first time in 11 years I had been without a place, since God had given me a place. And I called Father Constantine and I said, "I don't know how you become a member, but we're coming. Here we are." And we've been at St. Elijah ever since. Now, I can't prove anything I just said to you, but a person with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with an argument. So I can't debate it, and I won't. But I will say this: I'm still on the quest to find out if there's anything to believe in. Only I have found what there is to believe in. And I've done nothing ever since I found something to believe in to tell anybody else that was looking, here we are. I think there are We are living in a country and in a Western culture that is on the verge of collapse, morally, psychologically, intellectually. The roots are falling apart everywhere. I think that there's no reason to try to put a Band-Aid on culture. There's every reason for us to know there's something to believe in. By God's grace, you're here, and that's the truth, because I'm a nobody. I'm just some guy on a journey to see if there's anything left to believe in. And I'm going, look over here, look what I found, look what I found, looky, looky. That's all I'm doing. Looky, looky. And that's what these journeys we're in right now are about. Because somehow, Jerry Tolan, back in 2003, taped a series of lectures. Did them on VHS. Boy, we were in the ancient days. Now they're on. He did them again when we finally got the technology for that. And somehow, they're now on the internet, and people are responding to them. Rick Yeager now tapes them, and people are responding to what Rick's doing. Unintended. And people that are watching them are just starting out wondering if there's anything left to believe in. And they're asking tough questions coming from their world, and there's an audience that's bigger than us. And I don't mean to minimize us, but we're in a bigger world than just our little world here at St. Elijah or in Oklahoma City, and this world's about to collapse culturally, civilizationally. And I don't mean to be a warmonger or a panic guy or apocalyptic. I'm not doing that at all. I think there's something to believe in. And I think there's something we need to be paying attention to. And one of the things those of us who are in the church need to know is you can't stick your head in the sand like an ostrich and just say, I go to church and I'm Orthodox and it's okay. We've got to know what's going on around us. We've got to know that there are, in fact, two trees in paradise, and we're the only ones that know that. Everybody out there only has the one tree, and we're looking at that one tree right now. That's part one. Why are we looking at part one? Because that's the world we're living in. We're not living in some other world. We're living in the world of that tree. And we've got to understand it because it seeps into us and affects our lives while it's destroying lives around us. And if it's not destroying our lives, it's gobbling at our children and our grandchildren. So there's a whole lot more at stake than whether or not this is a Sunday school class and why are we talking about some of this stuff. I just needed to let you know there's just a burden. If I don't do this, why live? I just don't want to twiddle my thumbs. So in one sense, it's an apology to you for it being so abstract and so different from, as tough as the Gospel of John was, at least you had a Bible and it was Scripture and it felt religious. This doesn't necessarily at the moment feel religious, and some of you have asked me at the breaks, well, what about this and what about this? And they're great questions. Yes! But nobody out there believes the answer to that, and we don't know how to communicate the answer to them because we don't know their language. And if we're going to go, Paul said to the Romans, I'm a Roman, to the Greeks, I'm a Greek, to the Jews, I'm a Jew, that we might win some. Well, we've got to know what in the world, how in the world they're thinking to have some way to communicate with them. And so this journey is my personal journey and inviting us to do it together, let's figure out what's going on in that big, bad cultural world around us and the language they're speaking and why they're doing it, not so we can attack that culture, but so we can communicate the second tree to people that only have one tree. That's what we're doing. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. It's this one sounds like a fun night, doesn't it? The seductive tree. The seductive tree. We know the physical world by means of our senses. Our physical bodies relate and interact with physical realities via our five senses. We know that: sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch. And the tree of knowledge seduces us by appealing to our senses. It appeals to our bodies, which houses our senses. There is a relationship between our bodies, our senses, and sensuality. It is this relationship of being seduced by our bodily senses that provides the subtext for the story of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit together in paradise. And it is from stories like this that the image of the seductive female arose. During World War II, the seductive power of women was linked to the destructive power of the bomb. A slang term for a sexy woman was a bombshell. The nose art on American bombers had erotic pictures painted on them. Female bombers dropping bombs on the enemy. In July 1946, at the end of World War II, Frenchman Louis Réard created a skimpy two-piece swimsuit for women. He chose the name bikini 4 days after headlines across the world told of the first public testing of the atomic bomb on the Bikini Islands. Bombshells now wore bikinis. The message was clear. Female sexuality was as dangerous and destructive as the atomic bomb. Of course, the Cold War is now over. Today, marketing campaigns encourage women to be bombshells. To limit seduction, however, to female behavior is to misunderstand seduction. We're not here to demonize women. To limit seduction to sexuality, whether male or female, is to misunderstand seduction. Those who wish to demonize women and restrict seduction to female sexuality miss the depth of seduction invisibly present and embedded in a sensate world, a world of our senses. Sexual seduction is an excellent metaphor for the broader meaning of seduction, because the dynamic of sexual seduction is so easily understandable and applicable. It's a great metaphor. In the same way that seduction itself can be restricted and mean only sexual seduction, sexual seduction itself restricts our knowledge by restricting our attention to only the sensate physical world around us. Seduction includes all that deceives and seduces the mind into countless erroneous opinions, by which I mean the letter, the outward appearance of things and sensation, which leads one to limit his perception of the nature of visible things to what his senses alone can observe. We suddenly focus only on a physical world, period. We are seduced by our senses. The world stimulates us, rings our bell, attracts our attention. The world is a jealous lover, demanding an obdurate and stubborn attachment of the senses to sensible objects, an attachment which is hard to overcome. The sensate life is a life that panders to the senses alone. We give our attention, our whole attention, to the sensate world and its sensate life. Having acquired those things our senses offer, we gain nothing from their use and are left with the chastisement of emptiness. This is the seduction we speak of, a seduction that uses our physical senses to attract our attention to the physical world and the pleasures it has to offer, a seduction that causes us to love the things of our visible life that we have lustfully acquired and which pander to the senses alone. The seduction by the physical to the physical divides reality into the physical and the non-physical, and then focuses all our attention on the physical. For all intents and purposes, the non-physical ceases to exist in our lives. We are so busy with the physical, we have no time for the non-physical. Our lives are so busy with the material that even if it exists, we have no time for the immaterial. The result is we only know physical things in our lives. Our knowledge, what we know, is about physical stuff. Even what we know about God comes out of a book, not an experience. It is a physical knowledge from a physical book. We have no personal experience, no personal knowledge of anything that is immaterial and non-physical. We are ignorant of immaterial matters. We are living in a world that has exterminated the sacred, has exterminated the invisible, the immaterial from our lives. So do you see what I see? We know what we give our attention to. Now that may be grammatically incorrect, ending a sentence with a preposition, but it is the truth. We know that to which we give our attention. Again, let us not be in a hurry. This is so simple, we miss it. Seduction attracts our attention. It does not matter to the serpent to what we give our attention, as long as it is to the physical material world. Attention represents what we give our time to, what we look at, engage in, and spend the energy of our lives doing. Well, let me illustrate. Now, I want everybody to just, if you stop reading for a second and just, we're going to do this. I want you to focus on me. This is exercise number 1. You can read it later. Exercise number 1, and I better stop moving. Focus on me. Just, you're looking. Now, down here, take your right hand, and would you spread the fingers apart? Bring it up to the side like this without looking at it. You're still looking at me. And do this right across in front of your face without looking directly at your hand. And now come back and stop without looking directly at your hand. Can you still see me? Yeah. Yes. There's something kind of fuzzy in front of you, but you still see me. Now you can put your hand down. Okay? Now let's do a second exercise. I want you to hold out your hand in front of you here, and I want you to focus on your hand. You're looking at it, looking at all the lines in it as if you're a palm reader. Now go ahead and spread those fingers apart and hold it right up so you can really focus on it real good. And if possible, without looking out from it, looking at those fingers, if you're still kind of looking in my direction, do you see me somewhere fuzzy split between those fingers in the background? But you're still seeing your hand, but you're suddenly seeing something else maybe, but out of focus, yes? Okay, that's exercise 1 and exercise number 2. I'm now on page whatever exercise 2 is on. At the bottom of exercise 2, it should say, these 2 exercises remind us that both our hand and what is beyond our hand exist simultaneously. 2 things exist simultaneously. This is a metaphor. Your hand close up, then something far off exists, and it's interpenetratably. It interpenetrates. We also learned we can only focus on one or the other at a time. We only see which one we focus on. We can only see the one we're paying attention to. So, you can only look at your hand, even though something else is out there, or we can only look at what's out there and ignore this, but you can't do both at the same time, though both exist simultaneously. Got it? Both exist, but you can only focus on one at a time. The whole exists. The whole visual field exists, but we can only see the piece of the whole we are paying attention to. As far as we are concerned, at the moment I'm paying attention to my hand, everything else doesn't exist. It's only this. We all become the absent-minded professor that misses his own wedding because he's absorbed right here. Our perception of reality perceives the visible, external, outside appearance of stuff. We always see the outside of it. And there's always more at work in what we see than just the outside appearance that we focus on. We never see the internal identity that is present in something. We also noticed, while we are generally aware of something in front of us when we're looking outward, and likewise we're only generally aware that there's something out there beyond our fingers when we're looking directly at our hands. But in order to see the one, in order to see my hand, I have to ignore the presence of what seems to be out there beyond my fingers. I got to look at my hand and ignore you. Or I can look at you and I have to ignore my hand. You can see what you focus on, but the minute you do, we have to ignore the presence of everything else. I'm dealing with metaphors here to explain the invisible. Mankind possesses the ability to have selective vision. We can see that to which we selectively choose to give our attention. If we only focus on our hand, our vision is myopic, nearsighted. If we focus only on what is beyond our outstretched fingers, our vision is hypermetropic, farsighted. The point is this: we have the ability to see close up and far off. By using both of our visual abilities, I can focus here, I can suddenly focus there, you can focus back and forth. Your eyes will do it if you make them do it. There, here, I'm looking at Rick, now I'm looking at my hand, I'm looking at Rick, I'm looking at Brenda, looking at Dr. Paul. You can do both back and forth, but you have to choose to do both, or I'm just here, or I'm just there. Okay, you get it. The point is this: we have the ability to see close up and far off. By using both of our visual abilities, we can apprehend and experience the whole. Again, I'm talking a metaphor. As long as we use both ways of seeing, the whole is experientially available to us. If, however, we restrict or choose to use only one way of seeing, then we have limited our field of vision from the whole to only a piece. Now, we're on a journey together. Each week we examine part of a whole. We do not yet see the whole. Each week is a piece, but the pieces are not pieces of a puzzle. That is, the whole that we're talking about is not a puzzle that's been cut up into pieces, nor would we be able to see the whole just because we put all the pieces together when you finish a puzzle and you say, oh, I can see what the puzzle is now. The whole we are talking about is not a puzzle picture to be assembled. We are talking about the reality of the visible and the invisible, the immaterial and the material, the whole mystery of creation. For us, the pieces each week are like the fingers of an outstretched hand. Each week we are looking at a different finger. This is week 5. We got 5 now. We got the whole hand there in front of us. It's really hard to make the metaphor work just having one finger. You're focusing on it, but you can see there, and it's a little easier with 2. Now I can kind of begin to focus here, and I can see this. But boy, the time you get all 5 of them up, it really makes sense that there's something beyond the present, the visible. There's something there, and I'm not just talking, of course, that's more visible back there, but the whole is what exists behind and beyond and through our fingers. The whole is what we get a glimpse of through our fingers. As we focus on the fingers immediately in front of us, we begin to be aware something exists beyond us. Our fingers, there's something between the fingers there. We sense it, we sense its presence, sense the presence of something more than our visible fingers in front of us. Between our fingers, that which is there makes known, reveals its presence to us. Do you see what I see? You see, that's what I'm asking you. That we're not just physical. That's the only thing we got is metaphors, and we have to use this stuff to make them with. It was a burning bush that Moses turned aside to see. But he saw something through the flames. He saw something between the fingers, and what that presence was spoke to him and changed the course of his life and the human history. There's more than just a physical bush burning. There's a presence that is present everywhere and has never left us, that we have forgotten how to see because we never look between the fingers anymore. The whole was always there. It has been here each week so far. Remove our hand from in front of us and we see a visible wall. We don't see the whole. Instead of fingers, we see a wall. Holding up one finger still makes seeing the whole beyond the one difficult. When we add two or more, it begins to be a little easier metaphorically to realize there's something between us, our hand, and that wall. There's a presence here. We are becoming aware there is more than just new information to be added to each week. We are becoming aware there is something beyond our outstretched fingers. I'll tell you this, at least if you haven't seen it, sensed it, you have sensed it. You have sensed at least, you have no idea what I'm talking about. What is he talking about? He must have been trying out one of those new medical marijuana places before class tonight. Hey, golly, you guys know what I'm talking about. That's a scary oh, we're all children of the 60s. All right. Either I'm totally nuts or we're talking about something that is bigger than, beyond than, literal, visible, sensate stuff when we're talking about that which is invisible. So in a sense, our fingers hide what's on the other side, and yet because of them, they reveal when we're looking through, there's something there. Our fingers hide and reveal the presence of that which is not seen, but somehow present and visible because of what is seen. Picture with me, you're making a movie about the invisible man. Some scientist is going to drink the liquid that makes him invisible. That's not too hard to imagine, that kind of movie. Now, you are the director filming the scene after he has drunk the formula, and he's now gone invisible. If the scientist is now invisible, how in the world will we in the audience know what he's now doing in the scene if we can't see him? We have a problem as a director, wouldn't we? So we either just have the sound of footsteps, we're all looking at a blank screen, footsteps, thump, 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 or the turning on of water, or opening a door, creak, watch the door open and shut. So we either have sounds, or we have to have something visible that moves. Maybe we could put a hat on the scientist. That would work. We can watch a hat just bounce across the screen. Or if his garments didn't go, I guess we could look at him in his white lab coat, and there's just a white lab coat dancing across the floor. Whatever we would use, we have to use something that is sensate, visible or audible, to make known His presence in that room. Right? You got me? You got it? We following this? How else can that which is invisible make its presence known to us except by using something visible and sensate to do it with? How can the one that is speak to Moses, get Moses' attention, because he can't be seen in the first place? He couldn't be felt in the first place, tapping him on the shoulder. He's not a physical body. How in the world do you get Moses' attention? By something that's visible. Doing something that's visible is not supposed to be able to do. So Moses can then say, "That's odd. I think I'll turn aside and see." That which is invisible makes its presence known to us by that which is visible. If, however, we do this, if, however, we never, ever make any way take our focus off of right here, we don't even know the bush is burning to turn aside to. I'm the serpent. I don't want you to ever look through your fingers and see that which is invisible being revealed to you by the presence of the visible. How in the world can I get you to never, ever, ever pay attention to anything else but me? Look at this wonderful physical world of ours. If I can seduce you to only paying attention to whatever appeals to your physical fancies, you'll be so entertained and so involved with and spend all your time analyzing, figuring it out, collecting it on to none ad infinitum. And there's absolutely no time in your life for anything else but that which is physical. If I can seduce you to the physical, I don't ever have to worry about you catching a glimpse of the invisible and paying some of your time and attention to the one that is, because I've got all of your time and attention with the here and now. That's what we're talking about. I just summarized a whole bunch of stuff that's here. Each week we are not putting more pieces to the puzzle together. What page is that on? 98. You're with me. If all we're doing week after week is coming to an academic class, learning a little more stuff, then this is all we're doing. I've got 5 fingers up. Tonight this is number 5. Next week would be number 6. And wow, and by the time it's done, I'm going to have this whole nice picture. That's not what we're doing. We're slowing it down so we can pull it apart. There's this huge hole, W-H-O-L-E, in front of us. Week after week, we're making our way around it. No, we can't ever get around it. We're at least becoming aware that it's there. We're not adding more pieces, putting more puzzle pieces together. Week after week, the whole which already exists is disclosing more of itself to us, is at least disclosing there is a whole that is present among us. When you begin then to see what cannot be seen, something other than this, which is a way of having to confess, I've got more than one way of seeing. And when you can know what you know without knowing how you know, without it being taught, without it being printed in a book and memorized, you discover you've got more than one way of knowing. The world does not know it's got more than one way of seeing, and it's got more than one way of knowing, because we've eaten the fruit of a single tree that says, I'm the only tree there is. And that tree creates a singular world that begins to restrict and cut off and eliminate any other way of seeing, any other way of knowing, until we are totally claustrophobically trapped in a sensate world, forgetting and now no longer thinking about or even permitting it to be spoken of that there's anything bigger than our five senses. And there's nothing else outside of our singular way of knowing. Welcome to the world we live in. Exercise 1 and 2 with our hand and our outstretched fingers is a metaphor for understanding our perception of reality. I'm going to flip a page. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil seduces us to give all our attention to only the visible, the material, and the sensate portion of reality. The serpentine tree is a jealous lover, demanding all our attention, doing everything to keep us from giving any of our attention to anyone else. The serpentine tree demands we give all our attention only to our physical hands and our physical fingers. It does not want us to glimpse what is between and beyond our fingers. How dare us look at anything else except the visible world? Well, the master and the emissary, and I bet we ought to take a break, right? We're getting close to 8 o'clock, right? Yes. Why don't we take a quick break? We'll come back and bring your goodies with. No, we need some fellowship time. We'll take some time. We'll come back in a little bit. Take a break. Thanks. 99. Okay, I think we're on page 99 in your notes. The master and the emissary. St. Paul called those in the church in Corinth his co-workers, his co-laborers, his colleagues together, working in God's field, building God's structure together. Ministry is always a two-way street. We are partners together. We grow by our interaction together, not just this interaction, but our interaction having a cup of coffee and a donut. Different ones baking a cake and bringing it and sharing it. Whatever we're doing, we're interacting. As the saying goes, we go to heaven together, you go to hell by yourself. If you weren't here this evening, I wouldn't be here. There would be no seminar if Richard was not videoing, Charlie was not posting, There'd be nothing on YouTube or the internet. If Jerry hadn't been the videographer 16 years ago, there would be people that wouldn't have anything to see either. We are getting emails that we never anticipated or expected and aren't on the internet to get them, that have encouraged us to even be here tonight and to keep going with something. The emails let us know that there are many others. This week, Alessandra emailed us. What a joy to find your classes on church history, Jerry Tolan. Orthodoxy is very new in Cambodia. And I've always wanted to learn church history, and this is a great introduction to understanding and getting people interested. Thank you. I received the link from Higher Monk Cornelius, who served as our parish priest here for a few months only. He is now in the Philippines with a much larger mission. I would like to make 2 copies of the manual, and I'll let you know if I make more. Please let me know where I can send a donation. Thank you. Pray for our Cambodia mission. Alessandra, Phnom Penh, Kingdom of Cambodia. We won't let her pay for the manual. We have sent her a PDF file of it for free. Michelle lives in Exshaw, Alberta, Canada. She first emailed us in April of 2019, also in response to having watched Finding the Church Jesus Built. She emailed us again in June after having begun John. So both our videographers have been important in her life. John, the mystagogic gospel. And in June of this summer, she sent this email. I just want to let you know that I'm enjoying the mystagogic gospel video series very much. I'm on week 18. Many times now I have wondered if you have read The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. It's an immense book. I'm nearly finished it now after months of careful reading, and it describes beautifully the different ways our left and right brain hemispheres perceive the world. When you speak of truth being a person with whom we have relationship, not just a rational idea, proposition with which to agree, this sounds like an example of right hemisphere versus left hemisphere engagement with the world. It seems to me that the Orthodox Church has preserved the right hemisphere approach to life, whereas the Protestant world, I come from a Dutch Calvinist background, and the entire Western world for that matter is becoming more and more trapped in left hemisphere dominant ways of thinking. We need both hemispheres, obviously, but the right is supposed to be the master, the left is its servant. And when the left assumes the role of the master, things go awry. The hemispheric brain is a marvelous aspect of our wonderfully created humanity, and I am continually reminded of this in these lectures. I love how they challenge us to set aside our Western glasses and to view the gospel through the Eastern eyes instead. It puts the message, i.e. Christ, into better focus. I feel like I'm learning a new language, a new culture. Many thanks. I mention this for 2 reasons. First, these 2 emails are an example of how we are co-workers together. We together, us and them, are in God's field, building one another up, each contributing in our own way to the work that is being done. Secondly, this last email reminded me of a book by Steven Pinker, the Peter de Flores Professor of Psychology at MIT, which he wrote and I purchased and read in 2002. In his book, The Blank Slate, The Modern Denial of Human Nature, Pinker discussed new ideas from 4 frontiers of knowledge: the sciences of mind, brain, genes, and evolution. These 4 new frontiers amounted to a revolution, overthrowing the old science that had defined the 20th century. The implications of a new science meant that the 20th century's battle between faith and science was a battle no one was fighting. Science had won, and a new science was now overthrowing the old science. I began at that time to rethink the relationship of science and the gospel in light of the new science that was now arriving. In light of the extermination of the sacred in the 20th century, the question had to be asked, is there anything left to believe in? This rethinking led to a seminar series and a subsequent book, These Things I Believe, which also Jerry Toland videoed for us. Pinker's book in 2002 and its discussion of the then new frontier of neuroscience, and especially cognitive neuroscience, and my subsequent seminar and book, These Things I Believe in 2008, all came back to my mind with Michelle's comments on the similarities of John, the mystagogic gospel, the gospel of Eastern Christianity, and McGilchrist's book on the divided brain and the making of the Western world. I ordered McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, that day. In 2002, speaking of the new frontier of neuroscience, the science of how the human brain works, Pinker told of the work of 2 men, and you've got the quote I'm quoting from his book, neuroscientist Michael Gonzaniga and Roger Sperry, who showed that when surgeons cut the corpus callosum, joining the cerebral, when you cut the brain, the part that joins left and right together, they literally cut the self in 2, and each hemisphere can exercise free will without the other one's advice or consent. Even more disconcerting, the left hemisphere constantly weaves a coherent but false account of the behavior chosen without its knowledge by the right. For example, if an experimenter flashes the command walk to the right hemisphere by keeping it in the visual field that only the right half of the brain can see, the person will comply with the request and begin to walk out of the room. But when the person, specifically the person's left hemisphere, is asked why he just got up, he will say in all sincerity, to get a Coke, rather than, I don't really know, or the urge just came over me, or hey, look, you've been testing me for years since I had my surgery, and sometimes you get me to do things, but I don't know exactly what you asked me to do. In other words, he just invented an answer. Similarly, if the patient's left hemisphere is shown a chicken and his right hemisphere is shown a snowfall, and both hemispheres have to select a picture that goes with what they see. You got the guy split like this, and you can show him a picture that only one side of the brain gets, and you can show him a picture the other side gets. And if then he has to select a picture that goes with what they see, each using a different hand. The left hemisphere will pick a claw. You showed him a picture, the left side, a chicken. He picks the picture of a claw. You showed a snow field, a snowstorm to the right side, and the right hand will correctly pick a shovel, or the right whatever. But when you go to the left side at this moment, when the left hemisphere is asked why you chose the claw and the shovel, the left side blithely says, oh, that's simple. The chicken claw goes with the chicken, and you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed. The left side had never seen the snowstorm, but he's shown the two answers, and he invents a story to include the shovel. Pinker then commented, the spooky part is that we have no reason to think that the baloney generator in the patient's left hemisphere is behaving any differently from ours as we make sense of inclinations emanating from the rest of our brains. The conscious mind is a spin doctor, not the commander-in-chief. Often our conscious minds do not control how we act, but merely tell a story about our actions. We invent a cover story. Well, here, 17 years after Pinker's book, I found myself once again bringing myself up to date on the latest discoveries of cognitive neuroscience. Research into how the brain functions has sought to understand how the two sides of the human brain function and how the two sides then relate to each other. It is well outside our agenda to explore in depth McGilchrist's discussion of cognitive neuroscience. Suffice it to say, the brain has two sides, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. When it functions, each hemisphere makes use of the whole brain. However, each hemisphere functions in a different way and makes use of the opposite hemispheres differently. So we're not just divided, we make use of both, but whichever one's in charge uses the other side differently. McGilchrist's initial summary of the differences between the two hemispheres gives us the broad understanding of the difference. In general terms, then, the left hemisphere yields narrow, focused attention, mainly for the purpose of getting and feeding. The right hemisphere yields a broad, vigilant attention, the purpose of which appears to be awareness of signals from the surroundings, especially of other creatures, who are potential predators or potential mates, foes or friends, and is involved in bonding in social animals. It might be then that the division of the human brain is also the result of the need to bring to bear two incompatible types of attention on the world at the same time. One is narrow, focused, and directed by our needs, and the other is broad, open, and directed towards whatever else is going on in the world apart from ourselves. These different approaches result because each hemisphere attends to the world in a different way, and the ways are consistent. The right hemisphere underwrites breadth and flexibility of attention, where the left hemisphere brings to bear focused attention. If you're getting lost, I'll hurry. The left brain focuses on the hand. The right brain sees what's out there. This is the related consequence that the right hemisphere sees things whole and in their context where the left hemisphere sees things abstracted from context and broken into parts from which it then reconstructs its own whole, something very different from the whole that's actually there. It also turns out that the capacities that help us as humans form bonds and others, empathy, emotional understanding, and so on, which involve quite a different kind of attention paid to the world, are largely right hemisphere functions. The point is not simply that the brain has two hemispheres, nor is it that each hemisphere functions differently from the other. Hemispheric differences create two different ways in which we view the world. What we call reality is constructed from two incompatible worldviews. When I first read those words in June, reality is constructed from two incompatible worldviews, I wrote in the margin of the book, "Paradise has two trees." Now, I must tell you, I had been reading the homilies of St. Macarius, and particularly his homily number 37, reflecting on good and evil and paradise, and had been thinking and mulling over the two trees in paradise that represented when I happened to be at this point reading the two incompatible worlds. The more I read, the more Gilchrist described the choice between the two trees in paradise. Now, his book is not written from a religious perspective. Ian McGilchrist is a former fellow at All Souls College, Oxford, where he taught literature before training in medicine. He is an associate fellow of Green Templeton College, Oxford, a fellow of Royal College of Psychiatrists, a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a consultant emeritus of the Bethlehem and Maudsley Hospital, London, and has done research in neuroimaging at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. The bibliography for the Master and the Emissary runs 58 pages and contains approximately 2,000 sources, none of which are one of the Church Fathers. His is a secular book based on current findings of cognitive neuroscientific research. His broad training at Oxford in history, philosophy, and literature, plus his medical training in psychiatry and cognitive research, led McGilchrist to link brain science with the history of ideas. He says the greatest division in the brain is that between the two hemispheric systems, which leads to their capacity for relatively independent function. So as in life, we need both to focus on detail and yet see the whole. We've got to see the hand and look beyond it. He gives us plenty of scientific detail. His second chapter contains 535 footnotes. I'm hurrying. He also uses his right hemisphere to discuss the larger picture of the domination of the left hemisphere within history. The second half of his book discusses the history of how the brain shaped our world. Now, McGilchrist is not the first, nor is he the only current author to address the broader picture of culture in general and the telltale signs of the present collapse of Western culture. Steven Pinker, since that book in 2002, has written The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. He's presented his overview of human cultural history. And for those losing faith in the Enlightenment, Pinker has defended the continued usefulness of the left hemispheric rationalism in his Enlightenment Now, the Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. The attacks are beginning to come against Western culture and the rationalism, and so the rationalists are now having to write their defense of the Enlightenment. Yuval Noah Harari, with a PhD in history from Oxford University, specializes in world history at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, again approached culture from the broad perspective. And on a much more pessimistic note, Harari followed that book with Sapiens. He followed the book Sapiens with his second book, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, Mankind Becoming Its Own God. McGilchrist, Pinker, and Harari, present-day contemporary authors, grapple with the larger picture of world history and humankind. They wrestle with the larger issues of meaning. What does it mean to be human? And at our most basic level, what causes us to behave the way we do? It's the same history, the same humankind, and the same questions that the Genesis account of paradise and its two trees addresses. Let me say that again. These authors are beginning to approach the larger question, what is humanity? What does it mean to be human? What causes us to behave the way we do? And they're doing it in the most basic level, foundational level, eventually even coming to say that you have two sides to the brain. When one side dominates, the rationalistic side, it acts like you only have one part of a brain. The right side, when it behaves, makes use of the other side and learns from the other side and integrates the knowledge learned together. Wait a minute. One side says, I'm the only side. The other side says, I'm in charge, but I need your help. There's two sides. One side says, there's only one tree in paradise, the serpent's tree. The other side says, paradise has two trees. Now, I know we're tired and this is abstract, so we'll just stop here tonight. We're going to continue with just another parable now being told by the world out there about the master and the emissary. If you'll let me find it for you, that's where we're going to quit real quick this evening. It's about 2 pages over. Let me look real quick right there, and I'll find it for you so you can. 107. It's on page 107. Just follow along. There was once a wise spiritual master, do you see it? Who was the ruler of a small but prosperous domain, and who was known for his selfless devotion to his people. As his people flourished and grew in numbers, the bounds of this small domain spread, and with it the need to trust implicitly the emissaries he sent to ensure the safety of its ever more distant part. So you've got this small place, you've got a kind person in charge, and it's now beginning to grow and flourish, and so the kind person in charge can't be over it all himself. He has to have emissaries that are going to assist and help. It was not just that it was impossible for him personally to order all that needed to be dealt with. As he wisely saw, he needed to keep his own distance and remain ignorant of all that needed to be done in such concerns. So he nurtured and trained carefully his emissaries in order that they could be trusted. Eventually, however, his cleverest and most ambitious vizier, the one he most trusted to do his work, began to see himself as the master and used his position to advance his own wealth and influence. He saw his master's temperance and forbearance as weakness, not wisdom, and on his missions on the master's behalf, adopted his mantle, the master's mantle, as his own. The emissary became contemptuous of the master, and so it came about that the master was usurped, the people were duped, the domain became a tyranny, and eventually it collapsed in ruins. It is impossible to miss the telltale similarity in the implication between this modern secular parable and the story of paradise. McGilchrist admits as much. The meaning of this story is as old as humanity and resonates far from the sphere of political history. But then this broadly educated secular scientist applies this parable to our world in almost the same manner as we, in our discussion of the trees in paradise. I believe, in fact, that this story helps us understand something taking place inside ourselves, inside our brains, and played out in the cultural history of the West, particularly the last 500 years. Why I believe so forms the subject of his book. I hold, like the master and his emissary in the story, through the cerebral hemispheres, though they should cooperate, they are now in a state of conflict. Simply put, the world, the secular world, now has its parable of the fall. They're addressing the same issue of paradise being ruined. Do you see it? So we can talk about paradise, and we are. We can talk about the two trees, and we will continue to do so. But by making use of the other parable, we can see we're also speaking to everybody out there that the minute you say paradise and the minute you say Genesis or the minute you say Bible, have just dismissed anything you're going to say and have already shut down their brain. So if we're going to talk to that world out there, I may need to talk about right brain, left brain. I don't know. That's what this journey is about, helping us understand that world, that we might be able to help anyone in that world that tries to get out of it when it all starts falling apart. Okay. Dr. Paul asked me, he's not feeling well. He said, how long do we envision we're going to continue this? And I said, not much longer. We're almost done with part one. And in fact, hopefully next week we'll get real close to being finished with part one. Just look at the second tree, the one that was chosen. We're going to take off the last Monday of the month because we're going to set up for a bake sale in here. We're going to take off the first Monday of November because this room will still be filled with all the bake sale stuff. And we're going to allow our videographer, Rick, he has his own work. He's a videographer by trade, and Bork takes him away that night, so it works out perfectly. So we've got one more session together, and then soon thereafter, and hopefully we're going to be able to move there early in November, go to the second tree, begin talking a little more about our familiar territory of the faith we have and how it works and how it fits in with the other brain, the other tree, and how they work together according to the church fathers. That's where we're headed. God bless you for coming. I know this is abstract, and wow, we should be selling Excedrins, I think, or giving them away free. God bless you, and we'll see you next Monday night.